Rasmussen, and I am the pastry chef at Les Madeleines in Salt Lake City, and today we are going to make a savory tart dough. We're going to start with 2 cups of cake flour and a half teaspoon each of sugar and salt. Don't worry, the sugar you won't even be able to taste. This is a great dough for things like quiches and anything else you need a savory dough for. Then here I have 9 tablespoons of butter. And I'm going to chop them up into tiny pieces, and that will help the process of mixing this go a little bit faster. So little tiny chunks. And what we're going to do is we're going to do what's called cut in the butter into our flour, so that it's going to get it's going to end up looking like a coarse meal. That's what we want. So we'll just chop this up real quick. So these are about little 1 centimeter cubes, and that should make this go quickly. Okay. You can also do this by hand, but it's just as easy to do it while it's in the mixer. And then the only other thing you need are about 2 ounces of cold water. And depending on how dry it is where you are, you might need a little bit more. You want the final texture to feel something like a raw hamburger. So we'll just let that mix for a minute, because when we're done with it, we're going to chill it. I do have a piece that's been chilling, so I'm going to roll that out, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Because as you can see, we have a roughly square piece of dough, and we want to know how to turn it into a round, because that's what most of our tart pans or pie dishes look like. So I'm going to flour my table just lightly. You don't need to go crazy, because we don't want to add a lot of extra flour. I'm using a French rolling pin that's tapered, so I'm actually going to use the sides of the rolling pin, but if you have just a regular one, that of course is great, and there you will use the center. So I'm going to try, and and this is still really cold, so I'm just giving it a little bit of muscle, and it's not going to move a lot right at first, but that's okay. It's going to warm up pretty quickly. And then I'm going to keep half an eye on my mixing, because I don't want it to become too fine, and I also don't want it to actually end up in a paste. So as this warms up, this will become easier. And try not to do this. All that does is warm up your dough, but in a way that melts the butter that's in there that will then become our flakes, as opposed to warming it up to make it easier to roll. So so what I'm doing is every time I do it, I'm only rolling from the center out, and I'm turning it 90 degrees every time. And eventually what will happen when I do that is that it will become round instead of being square like the cube that we started with. The batch of dough that we're making will make approximately 2 8-inch or 9-inch tarts, or 1 double crusted if you're doing a double crusted. Okay, we're going to keep going, but see, you can see it's getting round. I'm going to actually join that together where it cracked a little bit. Okay. And you want to go until it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. You know, a lot of these cracks will be hanging over the edge of the tin, so you don't have to worry about them. All right, so it's big enough that I'm going to be able to measure it against my ring here. And like I said, some of those little cracks are going to be on the outside, so I'm not too worried about them. So there are a couple ways to get your dough into the ring. One is to fold it over gently. The dough is actually stronger than you think it is, so you'll be able to lift it. And then another way is to take your rolling pin and to roll it on, and then unroll it over your ring. This would work the same in a pie dish as well. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to take them, and I'm actually going to push it into the corners so that I get nice square corners. And I'm going to go all the way around doing that without trying to stretch it, because if I stretch it into the corners, then when it bakes it might pull back. So this way, if it's actually, I take it and I kind of fold it in, then that is where the dough goes, as opposed to being stretched. And then I'll get nice, really square corners. Because when your shell is not that tall, you want it to be as lovely as you can make it, and that's one way to do it. So if I look at the inside, I have nice square corners. And if I look at it underneath, my corners are also square. So we'll let that sit. I'm gonna take my rolling pin. I'm gonna roll along the outside to cut it off. And then I'm gonna take my nail, I'm gonna loosen the whole thing. And then if I'm going to put a filling in here that is going to be baked and I know it's going to bubble over, one of the things I do is I put my finger there and I kind of create a little ledge. And I go all the way around. So if I'm making an apple tart or something that really gets juicy and boils over in the oven, I'm going to push it over, and that creates a lip that that doesn't allow the juices to spill over, and therefore causing it to stick to my tart ring. So there's a nice little trick. It also just looks a little more finished. So if I'm going to blind bake this shell, which means I'm going to bake it so that it's just a shell and I can fill it later on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on a tray, and I'm going to gently, oops, uh-oh, it happens, but see, it's holding its shape. Ooh, crisis averted. So don't be scared if that happens to you. And then what I've done, I'm taking a coffee filter. I'm just going to put it inside, and I've just got some rice. You can use beans, you can use pie weights if you have that, but you know, we always just have rice sitting around, and you can bake it over and over again. So that's a nice easy thing in case you don't have pie weights. And so then I would bake this. So in the meantime, our dough has gotten to a point where we have just little tiny pieces of butter. I want some pieces, I don't want them to completely disappear, because that's how it becomes flaky. And so I'm ready to add my cold water. So I do that while the mixer's still going. And I have actually a little bit extra here, so I'm not going to add it all. And I'm gonna mix it, I'm gonna turn it up. So like I said, what I'm looking for here is for it to look like wet, or to feel like wet hamburger. So kind of not too wet, not too dry. And I'm gonna need just a little bit more. If you're adding extra, go like a teaspoon at a time. You don't wanna go crazy. Because if it gets too wet, then it starts to stick to your pan. It can also create more gluten, which is what we don't want when we're making tart shells. We want them to be light and flaky, as opposed to tough and chewy. So if you've ever had a pie or a tart and it's just, you have to gnaw at it, that's what's happened. Too much gluten has been made. So I have a nice, not too wet, not too dry. We call that the Goldilocks around here. Dough. I'm gonna move my scraps. I'm gonna pour it out onto my table to bring it together, and we're gonna use a technique called frisage. So right now I have lots of little balls of butter in the dough, but I want those to be flattened out so that they become flakes instead of bubbles. And so I'm gonna take the heel of my hand, and I'm just going to kind of flatten it out. And then I'm gonna wrap it up, and I'm gonna chill it for about a half hour before I can use it. And that is how you make a savory tart dough.